it is the best performing asset in
Ever.
all of human history.
There's never really been anything like this before.
Bitcoin is a form of wealth that no army can overrun.
Oh my God, I won. Look at this. I got 300 times my money. I'm going to sell it. I'm like, no. You don't sell the best performing asset ever. That nothing has changed. If this really is going to become an important form of money in the future, we're actually really kind of early.
Incredibly early, yeah. Historically, gold has been the most inelastic commodity.
It was, before Bitcoin. If the price of gold goes up, we'll mine more gold. If the price of oil goes up, they will drill for more oil. If the price of corn goes up, they'll plant more corn. Supply responds to price movements. As we all know, the Bitcoin algorithm is fixed.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't matter what the price does.
Correct.
Supply stays the same. We've never had that before. So think about that. Never. Never's a big statement, right? And so because of that, that's why it's behaving so differently than any other financial asset. I mean, it's just an amazing invention.
Tonight, we choose freedom. We choose responsibility. We choose a future where the fruits of your labor, your savings, and your enterprise are secure. A future where sound money sets the foundation for a stronger, fairer, and freer America. I love that. That's fantastic.
That's what I believe.
I vote for Larry.
I'm not running for president. I have no desire to do anything political.
Welcome back to another episode of Cypherpunk'd. Today, I'm here with my good friend Larry Lepard, and we are going to dive into his book, The Big Print. And I believe this is episode 11 in our podcast series. Welcome to the show.
Morning, Manny. Nice to see you.
Good morning.
Good to be here.
Bright and early. Today, let's talk a little bit about the investment implications of Bitcoin, which I'm sure we're going to spend a lot of time on this because
absolutely
it's our love.
Yes.
So, in your book, you write that you view Bitcoin as a digital gold. This is a decentralized digital asset with a fixed supply, auditable transparency, and no counterparty risk. That's like music to my ears.
Great, isn't it? Yeah.
But Michael Saylor uses this term, pristine digital capital. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, I think what he's pointing out is that a Bitcoin, which is really just an entry in a ledger, is pristine in the sense that nobody can attach it. And if you have the coin key, you own it. And it is a limited form of digital capital. You know, as we all know that there are 21 million Bitcoin, and it's immutable and it can't be changed. So it's really, there's never really been anything like this before. Gold was the closest to this. And then along comes digital capital, digital scarcity. That's what we talked about as the invention. What Bitcoin invented was digital scarcity, legitimate digital scarcity. So I think investors have come to see that that has value. Obviously, the marketplace says it has value, and that's what counts. That's Carl Menger's point that money is the most liquid good. And as we're going to talk about, I mean, the performance of Bitcoin since foundation, since it began, it's just unbelievable.
It's unfathomable.
There's never really been a financial asset that has performed in this way.
Yeah, I mean,
ever.
It is, like I tell people, like it is the best performing asset in
ever.
All of human history. Over multiple, almost 2 decades now. Like
right.
It's not
exactly. And even if you throw out, I mean, the early period obviously is kind of insane because it started at zero, so it started at a penny, and went to multiple dollars. But even if you throw out that early period and you start with a pizza transaction or something, it still has outstanding numbers.
It's still millions of percent, hundreds of thousands. I mean, it's insane.
Exactly.
Let me ask you about this. Bitcoin being the perfectly inelastic commodity. Yeah. That's an interesting term and phrase.
Yeah, I think in an earlier episode, we talked about that a little bit. I mean, I just briefly, what it means is every commodity will react to its price. So I think I said, if the price of gold goes up, we'll mine more gold. If the price of oil goes up, they will drill for more oil. If the price of corn goes up, they'll plant more corn. Supply responds to price movements. As we all know, the Bitcoin algorithm is fixed.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't matter what the price does.
Correct.
Supply stays the same. We've never had that before. So think about that. Never. Never's a big statement, right? And so because of that, that's why it's behaving so differently than any other financial asset.
Cryptography and math is truly incredible.
It is. I mean, it's just an amazing invention.
historically, gold has been the most inelastic commodity.
It was, before Bitcoin.
But I know this morning we just talked about, I guess in the Large Hadron Collider, they've been smashing lead atoms together. They've been smashing lead together, and now they've formed gold. So the alchemist dream has been realized.
I think there's no doubt that there could be more supply of gold under various circumstances. I mean, there's gold in the ocean. There's gold on asteroids. I mean, and we haven't figured out how to, sift the ocean to get the gold out of it, or we haven't figured out how to capture asteroids, or as you say, they've chemically they've figured out how to actually convert other metals into properties of gold. But as you and I both know, the cost of all these things right now is massive. Right now. Is massive. Doesn't make any sense. But
I would say this is probably not an issue for the next decade. But if you take a decade plus outlook, definitely
you never really know. I mean, we never really know. I mean, It certainly, represents somewhat of a risk. I think it's more than a decade or two, but whatever. I mean, it's we don't have that issue with Bitcoin. Now, Bitcoin has different issues. I mean, you've got the risk of quantum computing and so forth, which I've been told by the people I respect is not that large of a risk. But
I mean, it might.
Some people are afraid of it.
I mean, luckily we have a core development team, and anything that becomes existential to Bitcoin can easily be fixed, right?
That's the thought. Yeah. Lynn says that they would hard fork it or whatever into the more sound version.
Yeah. And I think, if there's an existential threat to the network, you're going to have the support of everybody who's invested in that network, right? So,
absolutely. Yeah. And I know there are people who say, well, the internet will go down and we'll never have an internet. I just don't believe that. I think
there's just so many problems before you get to Bitcoin, even with traditional security networks, whether it be nuclear systems and banking systems, and like the whole world would end, right? So there does have to be,
I mean, if we go back to total Mad Max, none of this stuff's going to work. But then, owning lead is going to be the most important thing.
Yeah. I mean, the crazy thing is Bitcoin still would work in Mad Max scenario. You've got people that have, satellites and Starlinks and, off the grid stuff. I mean, the Bitcoin network will still march on.
It would still run.
A huge proportion of the Bitcoin network right now is the mining specifically is already off the grid, right? Completely off of a centralized things where people are just in the middle of nowhere and they've got,
they're grabbing
solar farms,
stranded energy,
or, flare gas or whatever.
Yeah.
We'll talk a little bit more about that, but here's a term: compound annual growth rate. You always see this CAGR.
Yeah.
Talk about CAGR a little bit, what that means, and kind of, you have Bitcoin here every year. You've got it listed compared to gold in the S&P. What does that mean, CAGR?
It's just the rate at which the value of something increases. So, it compounds, because let's take you have $1 and you have a 10% rate of return. Well, then in a year you own $1.1, and then if that rate of return remains the same, in another year, you don't actually have $1.2, you have $1.21 because you've compounded on the first 10. And so every, it's a really important measure for investment performance, because what it suggests is if it stays the same or, grows, that you grow in a geometric fashion, not a geometric way, not a linear way. And that's important.
Gotcha. This next graphic and chart that you have listed here, this is one of my favorites to visualize the world and the market and really where all the value sits in the world.
Is this Jesse Meyer chart?
Yes, this is the TAM, total available market. And what's also interesting too is that I guess there's this huge derivatives market that nobody really knows how big that is, and it's kind of
those aren't real assets; those are just paper claims.
That's what I'm saying, but it's kind of scary, right? If it puts a lot of other stuff at risk. It's striking, except for where true bear assets are not at risk, like Bitcoin and gold, essentially.
Right. I mean the chart, that you're referring to is Jesse Meyer's, rather famous because sailors use it a lot. Total available market, for assets. And if you look around the world, roughly, he says that all financial assets, and this includes real estate, but real estate, cash, stocks, bonds, etc., adds up to roughly $900 trillion. So consider that to be kind of $900 trillion of assets that people have invested in. And right now, the Bitcoin network is worth approximately $2 trillion. Just under $2 trillion. So Bitcoin, as what I consider to be the soundest money that has ever been created, is now 2/10 of all available investment assets. Now, that's just incredibly small. 2/10, not even 1%. So
0.2%.
0.2, right? So let's just dream. Let's say Bitcoin goes from 100,000 to 1 million. Which we all believe that will happen over some time frame. Well, now it'll be 2% of all financial assets. Well, gold is, that would be actually, it would need to go to $1 million to equal the size of the gold market, which is about $20 trillion. So,
but this is saying that all these other assets.
Well, that's assuming the 900 stays fixed.
I mean, none of these things are going to stay fixed.
Yeah,
they're all going to grow.
They're going to get bigger too, right? Because they're going to print more money. But
real estate.
Setting all that aside, I'm just saying in a static, set of numbers right now, Bitcoin could go up 10x in price and still only be 2% of all the world's assets. And there have been times when gold represent 10, 15% of the world's total assets. So I guess the point when people look at it and say, gosh, it's too expensive, we're too late, I would come at it from the other point of view and say, no. If this really is going to become an important form of money in the future, we're actually really kind of
incredibly early. Yeah.
I mean, we've got a long way to go.
Yeah. It's very, very early.
Yeah.
So that's
it's
always a great one to visualize.
It's a great chart. I mean,
so Jesse Myers, onceinaSpecies.com. That's the source you put here. So Paul, maybe you put that in the notes for people so they can actually look at it. Maybe you can pull up that picture and add it to the podcast.
Yeah, really Jesse's a great guy.
Yeah, it's really cool to look at. His name on X is Croesus _
Croesus, yeah.
Croesus, who's a famous Lydian king, I believe.
Yeah, who believed in gold.
Rich as Croesus.
Rich as Croesus, yeah. I think he was one of the first guys to mint gold coins.
Yeah, I think if I remember correctly, his dad was, I want to say Aliatus.
I don't know.
I think it's Aliatus was his dad who actually created the first coinage from the river.
Very possible.
Yeah,
so, I know that was where the first coinage came from.
Yeah.
Lydian.
Look up, it's Alaytes. But I think he was Croesus's father. And what he did was essentially I think he took silver and gold and minted it into something called electrum.
Yes.
So they had these electrum coins. And I think what Croesus did was, if I remember correctly, I think he separated the two. Like he had gold coins, just pure gold, but I could be wrong about that.
I have a vague memory of something like that too.
It's really interesting story there. There's so many cool legends about that river and how there's like mythology about the Midas touch, right? Have you ever heard,
Oh yeah.
You ever heard that?
Yeah.
Well, that's that river where they discovered the first gold, silver, and that's where they made the coins from. So, if anything he touched until he put his hand into the river to get rid of that gold touch because he had turned everybody gold. It's just a fascinating mythology, how it kind of intertwines with history.
Yeah.
I just find so interesting. But yeah, that was really the king. Yeah, here it is, King Aliatus. There was an extra T. So he had the very first coins in Lydia.
600 BC.
Yeah, that's incredible, isn't it? The coins were made of electrum, a naturally occurring alloy of gold and silver, sourced from the Pactolus River near Sardis, Lydia's capital. Electrum's variable gold to silver ratio made standardization critical. Very, very interesting. Next here, you talk about something called the power law, which I find really interesting. And then you use this analogy that you throw a pebble into a pond. The way to think about this is throwing a pebble into a pond, right? And this is a little small pebble, you throw it in. But what essentially happens is you've got these ripples and this ring starts to grow and grow and grow and grow and grow. And you write, this is the essence of a power law, a mathematical relationship where one quantity varies as a power of another. Right. So as you throw this pebble, you've got this ripple that grows. Yeah.
And the interesting thing about the power law is the book talks about, and I borrowed this from Fred Krueger and another Giovanni, who was another PhD math guy, was that what they've done is they've looked at the price of Bitcoin since inception, and they've mapped it on a log basis, a log of time and a log of price. And they've actually found that they were able to fit a curve to this growth that had about a 97% R-squared correlation. So anyone who's had a statistics class,
unbelievable.
They know that 97% R-squared, that means there's actually some explanatory power in their model.
Unbelievable. I mean, that in our correlation like that is just ridiculous.
Yeah, it's very high. So
right. In data, 97% of the time is a useful model.
it is a useful model. It doesn't mean it can't break, as you and I both know.
Well, I saw it.
Yeah, right. And we think it might break. But having said that, you can use that, and I've used that to kind of think, okay, here's a reasonable sense of what the price curve might look like for this asset. I actually believe we will break the power law model to the upside at some point.
If we get hyper Bitcoinization, absolutely.
Exactly.
All bets are off.
And I think that's what will happen.
That would just be insane.
But the question is when, and nobody really knows when.
Yeah, that's wild. I mean, but even if you look at this model, like it's incredibly bullish for the price of Bitcoin as an asset.
Yeah.
So breaking it to the upside, I mean, that's just unbelievable. But as I said in the previous episode, us statisticians have a famous saying that, all models are wrong, but some are useful, right?
Right.
So,
to me, this is a useful model because it maps history of what's happened.
Exactly. So, you look at that R value and kind of figure out, that will tell you how useful the model has been historically, right?
Right.
But this is fascinating. Complex systems explode in magnitude. The most fascinating application of power laws is in the adoption of revolutionary technologies. Its growth doesn't follow a neat linear path. Bitcoin's adoption curve exhibits classic power law characteristics. You have a post here from Fred Krueger that you put in a book, which is pretty interesting, talking about standard deviations. And according to this particular model that historically has been very accurate, right? 97% correlative value. Bitcoin should be worth $326,000 in 5 years, 1.1 million in 10 years, and 7 million in 20 years. Some believe that Bitcoin's performance will exceed those numbers as fiat currencies increasingly fail. You're right. I'm sympathetic to that view. So yeah, I think if in that case, in that scenario, totally makes sense, right? As people flee to the safest
by the way, that's the trend line. The numbers you've just quoted are the trend line.
The trend line, but not the standard deviation.
You get standard deviations above and below, as we know, as we've seen, because as we know, Bitcoin is volatile. I mean, it's a revolution, and so there are days when Bitcoin's going to the moon, and there are days when Bitcoin's dead. But just to clarify, 5 years out, the model says Bitcoin will be 300,000 a coin, 328 a coin, but one standard deviation up says 670,000 a coin, and two standard deviation up says 1,000,008 a coin. My view is we'll probably start breaking the power law, and there's a good chance that 5 years out we're at $1 million a coin.
Yeah, I would not be surprised whatsoever. That's definitely within the realm of possibility, and also that's only a standard. I mean, the 5 year standard deviation, even if the trend line says 226, you're at 2 million,
2.5 up, and in prior runs we've had 2.5 up very easily.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
This is a really interesting one that I've looked at over I've seen this one many times, but it really helps people realize. We show this at our Bitcoin meetups, right?
Is this the price of a home?
The price of a home, US dollars versus Bitcoin, right? So you look at 2016 and, you kind of see how many Bitcoin it would have cost to buy and what the fiat value of that home would be, right? That 288,000. And you can really kind of visualize how asset inflation and how asset inflation has occurred, but also look how Bitcoin is protecting your purchasing power over time. I mean, it's truly striking. 664 Bitcoin would have cost to buy.
For those who aren't looking at the chart, let me just read out the numbers so people can understand. First of all, what's interesting, so it says the price of a home, and the average price of a home in the United States was $288,000. That was in 2016. 2024 is 8 years later, $434,700. So a lot of housing inflation in that period. In 2016, it cost 664 Bitcoin to buy a home. Today, it costs 6.6 Bitcoin to buy a home. So, pretty stunning.
So basically, if you had dollars in a savings account and you had $288,000 in a saving account in 2016, you could have bought a home with that money. Had you just left it into a savings account and collected 1% interest or whatever they give you, maybe less than that, you would maybe have $293,000, and the price of a home would have essentially almost doubled. So you would be able to buy half a home.
Right. And that's the fiat debasement piece of what's going on.
Yeah. And had you had 664 Bitcoin in 2016 and not spent it, you would have been able to buy
100 homes.
One home. In 2016, you would have been able to buy one home.
Yeah.
But had you held that Bitcoin for 8 years, you would now be able to buy, almost 100 homes. 100. I mean, that is insane to visualize, insane. Right? Yeah. But if you listen to this series and read Larry's book, I think what you'll really start to understand is, you see that chart, but you'll understand why. You'll get the essence fundamentally of why this is a thing and why this is happening and what is happening. And I think that's super important. It just helps you with your big picture worldview of how things are playing out and how things are not going to change into the future. The fundamentals instead are aligning in a way that it's going to even get worse. Essentially, I mean,
I agree,
and that's the thesis of the book.
To me, the essential message from that chart or that schedule is that if you operate on a Bitcoin standard, in Bitcoin terms, everything will get cheaper in the future.
Exactly.
And that's why I think the average person sits there and thinks to themselves, gosh, I'm making X amount of money and things just keep costing more. I can never get ahead. And I think that's why so many Bitcoiners, people who are true Bitcoiners who've fully gone down the rabbit hole, come to the conclusion that this is great. I know that my future will be better because I'll be richer. or I mean, richer in terms of, and I don't mean, in terms of purchasing power. I know that I can buy the things I need with what I've got because what I've got will increase in value.
I love that. Investing in Bitcoin, volatility. The volatility is absolutely a key aspect of all this, where, a lot of people get shaken out over volatility because historically,
that's the one thing that I try to point this out in the book because, I want full disclosure. The only time I've seen people get hurt in Bitcoin, well, two things: when they get very highly levered, and then it goes against them, they get blown out. But the other thing is, I've seen, newbies or just people who aren't familiar with what it is. They get all excited. It's a new all-time high. It's a great asset. They come in, they buy their first Bitcoin, and then we have a correction.
Yeah, and
they panic, and they think to themselves, "Gosh, I made a mistake. It's down 30%, or in some cases, it's been down 60 or 70%. I got to sell it now," and that's just the wrong answer.
Yeah,
right. But and it's sad, and I think it's incumbent on all Bitcoiners to, as you orange pill your friends and explain this asset to them, to make them aware of the fact that when you buy this, you need to be prepared to have a 50% drawdown.
Yeah.
Knowing that if it happened, you, one, wouldn't sell, and two, might buy more.
Yeah. I highlighted one sentence you had in this section, and it is, money is an emotional issue.
It
Which really is. Right?
Sure is. Yeah.
That's, with our meetup group that we have, we have, people come to me like, what do I do? How do I buy? When do I buy? How, they come to me and I just say, look, if you don't have a 5 to 10 year, investment horizon before you even want to look at it.
Use the tree. Use the tree example, right?
Yeah, I just say don't even bother, because there's a lot of volatility, and it's you can't try to time the market. I explain that I ask them, are you a professional trader? Is that your full-time job? Do you study the charts and logos of every day? Because if that's not your full-time job, you're going to get destroyed by the people, the 1 to 3% of people who that's their full-time job, right?
That's
anything else in life. If you don't put in the effort and the work and, learn how to do these things, it's a whole career, right? It's a whole job. So, if you don't have
ironically, Bitcoin, people think Bitcoin is getting rich fast. It's not really. It's actually, ironically, it's actually getting rich. It's getting rich
slowly. Yeah, exactly. You have to have
because it's time in the asset that makes sure you'll be there.
Time in the market beats timing the market, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's what I tell them. So, we really teach dollar cost average, right? Whatever that number is for you, whether it's $10 a week or $10,000 a week, whatever that number is for you, where it's you can just set it and forget it. And, Bitcoin goes up, great. You're amazing. Your portfolio looks better. Bitcoin goes down. Okay, I'm stacking more sats, right? That's kind of the mindset you have to have. And that's what I teach everybody. And everybody who's come to our meetup, who's listened to that advice, they send me messages. Maddie, thank you so much.
Right.
I get these messages and it makes me happy. You listened, right? It's you did good. And now look, you've beat.
Yeah. It's simple, but it's not easy.
Exactly. No, you're right. You're right, because it requires discipline.
It's very simple to do. This is there's no rocket science here. But that doesn't mean that emotionally it's easy. It's not.
You're 100% right. And this is purely fundamentals, purely math, right?
Yes.
It's just, once you see the big picture, it's this is just math,
right?
And the term we use, and you're right, this is why Bitcoiners say HODL, which is an abbreviation for hold on for dear life. Volatility comes with the asset. You also have a really interesting chart that shows the volatility, right? It shows these huge, parabolic price movements up, and then massive corrections, and then at the bottom of the correction, you're still 5 times higher than what the previous peak was.
That's right. That's what I always say: higher highs and higher lows.
Exactly.
Going the right way.
You talk a little bit about the Sharpe ratio here. I think this is an interesting topic. I think it was 5-6 years ago. All the rage was add Bitcoin to your portfolio because it'll increase your Sharpe ratio. What's a Sharpe ratio?
Yeah. So this was there was an academic named, I think it was William Sharpe, who came to the conclusion that you could that assets should be measured on two things: how well they perform in terms of going up, but how volatile they are. And the goal was to get as much upside per unit of volatility as possible, which kind of became measured as the Sharpe ratio. And you wanted to have a higher Sharpe ratio rather than lower. And it's the formula. You're looking at the standard deviation of the price movements compared to the price changes. Excuse me.
No worries.
So anyway, this ratio is something, and traditional investment managers have used this for years to try and price, and if a stock has a high Sharpe ratio, that's a more attractive stock than a low stock ratio. There are a lot of people, by the way, Nicholas Taleb and others who've said that it's all kind of bullshit because volatility isn't the correct measure of risk. But let's set that aside for a moment. Bitcoin has a very good Sharpe ratio. It's extremely volatile, but that volatility is made up for by the fact that when it goes really quickly and performs very well. So if you do the calculation of the Sharpe ratio, Bitcoin's got a good one.
Just because the upside is so high.
Because the upside is so high when it runs. But, I mean, and there are some people who say, gosh, I could never be involved with an asset that has these drawdowns, these 50% draws. Well, keep in mind, it's the best performing stock of the past 25 years, and I think perhaps ever, is Amazon.
Well, now it's NVIDIA, I think. But Amazon.
Actually, you may be right. NVIDIA may have beat it. I have to go look at the math. But
I think this is recently. This is over the past year.
Yeah, okay, possibly.
NVIDIA's really just...
But from the beginning, Amazon is up 218,000%. Okay, I mean, this is just... And what it really was is it was taking Walmart and putting it on the internet, right? And it was a brilliant idea, and they captured that market, and they are the leader, blah, blah, blah. The point is that, if you were an Amazon investor, you really had a roller coaster ride. I mean, in 2008, it was down 90%. There are, I think, tens of cases of where it's been down 50% or more. Well, and so very much like Bitcoin, there were times when it was great, and there were times when it was really not so great. But the trend, it kept making higher highs and higher lows despite all that volatility.
Yep. But the important thing to understand with that is you have to really understand, like when that happens, like you have to understand the fundamentals of what you're invested in.
Well, that's the thing.
Or else you're going to fail.
You got to understand what you own.
Exactly.
And as Saylor said when I was on stage with him in Madeira a couple of years ago, you can't make the mistake of, and this is going to happen to people in Bitcoin. I've actually already had it happen to a couple of my clients in my fund that I advise. Where they bought it at 15 or 20 or 30 and it went to 100 and they thought, oh my God, I won. Look at this. I got 300 times my money. I'm going to sell it. I'm like, no. You don't sell the best performing asset ever that nothing has changed. I mean, if something were to change.
Yes, the investment thesis, nothing has changed.
Nothing has changed. You just stay with it, and, so people sadly make a lot of investment errors.
Yeah, no doubt. What I think is interesting too is the, we're talking about Sharpe ratio of just Bitcoin itself, but when it comes to portfolios, which was this was the whole thing, adding Bitcoin to a portfolio, like Bitcoin has a good Sharpe ratio, but when you add it as just even a small percentage to a portfolio of other assets like traditions, like TradFi management, right? Bonds and stocks, adding Bitcoin as a small allocation to that greatly improves the Sharpe ratio
of the
overall.
Yes.
Which that was like the big thing about 5 years ago.
Exactly. And that's actually even true of gold. I mean, people have been, the world sadly has just gone 100% stocks.
Yeah.
And I understand why. They've worked for a long, long time. But, these sound money alternatives, gold and Bitcoin, they have value. And most particularly, they have value when stocks aren't working. They actually work pretty well. So what that would suggest is that, you don't need to be 100% Bitcoin. But to have, I always tell my clients, look, zero Bitcoin is the wrong answer. I don't care if you have 2%, 5%, 10%, 30%. You need to have something because if this thing performs the way we think it's going to perform, it's going to move your needle.
No doubt. The history has shown us that it does.
It does. And what's going to change? That's the point.
The fundamentals are only getting stronger.
In my view, I agree.
Yeah. The Four Horsemen of Bitcoin skepticism. I like this.
Let's see, what have I put there?
Technical vulnerability. So this is an interesting one to talk about.
Yeah. Again, in this book, I've tried to be a credible advocate for Bitcoin. And I think, some people are just like, Bitcoin's great. All you can do is buy Bitcoin. And they don't talk about all of the different issues that surround it. And I think the technical vulnerability was the one that I came to the party with, right? I'd seen these other attempts at creating digital scarcity fail, right? There were 7 or 8 of them. And there's a great chart that shows the etymology of Bitcoin, how we tried different things, and none of them had all the pieces together. And I think, it's still not, it is based on computers. It is a man-made system. It's not beyond the possibility of failure. I think the kinks have been really worked out of it, and the odds of failure are very, very, very low, but they're probably not zero. And so to me, that's one of the that's one of the largest risks. It's and I consider it a small risk, but it is a risk.
So quantum computing would potentially fall in that if the core team doesn't just upgrade. I mean, I think the upgrade might already even be ready, just sitting there, right, to like push out. But like that's the one thing that I can kind of think of where it's like, if somebody cracks this very quickly, I mean, the whole world would have major problems first, but like Bitcoin eventually would be at risk there. But the upgrade is ready to roll out, and all the nodes need to do is just adopt it.
Yeah, and quantum computing, as I understand it, is kind of just a super high-powered computer that could run so many simulations they could hack every password in the world. Well, wouldn't you just start with the banks?
Of course,
and wiring money out of the banks.
Yeah, that would for sure be the first thing.
And the Pentagon and all the the government and all the other. I mean, try and get the nuclear codes. I mean, there are all kinds of other things that might get cracked first. But that's a risk.
Yeah.
So the other three horsemen are regulatory uncertainty, adoption, stagnation, and then the protocol mutating. And the regulatory uncertainty, that was a bigger risk 3 or 4 years ago. I mean, before we had an ETF, before we had the SEC saying it was a commodity, there was a time, I recall quite well, speaking to many, many people, said, I get it, I like it, but the government's going to shut this down. And China shut it down, but there's still Chinese people who own Bitcoin. I mean, it's very hard to shut it down.
It's kind of like I heard this analogy once where it's like, if you can ban water, right? You can try to ban water, but like if you go in the ocean and try to push water away from you, it's just going to flow around you everywhere.
You kind of have a problem.
Bitcoin is the same thing. Like all China did was ban themselves from Bitcoin. They didn't ban Bitcoin, right? Because
and now we have ETFs, and now we have a strategic Bitcoin reserve. So now that could change. The next administration could decide they hate it. But the point I'm making is that it appears to me that horse is out of the barn. It's not going back. So regulatory, I don't think they're going to be able to regulate Bitcoin out of existence.
I mean, we literally had that the past 4-year administration. I mean,
they did try
to do everything they could.
Operation Choke Point did everything possible.
They did all sorts. The SEC, they did every little thing they could try to do, and Bitcoin came out of it, massively up in price, and just fine, right? It's like you can't. There's really nothing you can do there. I make the analogy too with China, where we talked about it before, is that actually after they tried to ban mining actually increased within their borders over like 6 months later. Go back and look, and it's like more hash rates here than before. It's like it's insane, kind of crazy.
Yeah, the next one is adoption stagnation. I mean, this is what I call this is the dogs eating the food, right? I mean, if ever people were to just say Bitcoin, who cares, and everyone got kind of nice idea, but we don't really need that. And people started behaving differently. I mean, it's becoming money because we all recognize its superior qualities, and therefore we're all adopting it.
Yeah.
If that were to change, I don't know why it would, but if that were to change, and everyone would say, to hell with Bitcoin, we don't need it, then that would be a problem. But we can measure this because we can measure wallets, addresses, transactions, hash rate, a number of other metrics that are all consistently growing.
I mean, it's. And so indubitably, if you look at it, it's like it's up and to the right. I mean,
right. So in light of that, I don't see that happening. And then the final one is, we were very fortunate. I was very fortunate. I was at an event where I was able to, with a small group of people, speak to Michael Saylor. And I asked him, I said, hey, Michael, what do you think is the biggest risk to Bitcoin? And he said, well, I don't think there are that many, but one that I do keep an eye on is the notion that there are core developers, and humans being humans, they always tend to want to tinker with things and make them quote unquote better.
Yeah. We're seeing that now, actually, right now.
Yeah, a little bit with this. Yeah, with what's it called? The
op return function. That's always existed, and I think the core team actually wants to expand the features of that potentially, or make it more usable. To use that kind of like loophole that Satoshi put in. I mean, Satoshi put it in for a reason, because the very first fucking message he did was a political statement that he attached in a block, right?
Right.
So,
and so the issue is,
it was intentional.
We want to let any of the block size be used for that kind of thing. But Saylor made the point that if there were a bunch of rogue core developers who decided to do that, we needed in some way change. We need to have another block size war or something. That would be very, very bad. But he said what mitigates against that, and I agree with him, is just that most people in the community, most people who own the keys, most of the miners, most of the nodes, everyone knows that that's a bad idea.
Yeah.
And as you know, for it to change, everyone has to adopt it.
The nodes have to adopt it. Yeah.
They have to adopt it.
Put out the core team, the volunteer team of core developers can put out whatever they want.
Right.
But if the nodes don't implement that and adopt it, good luck. I mean, that's not,
Yeah. So I rate that as a fairly low risk as well. Yeah. But they're all somewhat present.
Yeah. I mean, I think, regardless of, like, some of these little things they're arguing about are just so much, like, this whole thing is like so irrelevant whether it happens or it doesn't happen. It doesn't change anything really about Bitcoin, in my opinion. I think it's ridiculous.
I pretty much agree with you.
So
I mean,
like whoever wins that argument, which it looks like Core is heavily in the lead, and you know, it doesn't even matter who wins that argument, because like whether they allow, you know, whether they kind of reduce the loophole for OP return, or whether they expand it, or whether the Bitcoin block size, like each Bitcoin block is already so small that it's really irrelevant. I mean, like, you know, we could.
I hope
like,
so. I hope so.
They could increase that block. I personally, like, if you look at the mathematics and you look at like you know, the pace of technological innovation and Moore's law, and like how advanced our storage capability is now, like, and how it's grown over time with hard drive space and STD space and M.2 drive space. It's like, this is all a moot point, because you could increase that Bitcoin block size by like 10x, and it really wouldn't be. Everybody would still pretty much be able to run a node. 10x might be a little hyperbolic, but you know, 5x, and everybody could easily run a node without problem. You know, 99% of people that are running nodes right now wouldn't even have any issue whatsoever. They would just maybe put in a little bit of a bigger hard drive for the future, but it would not be that big of a deal. But hey, it's you know, it's interesting to see these discussions and play out and whatever. But yeah, I would just say that it's not a risk personally.
Right.
You know, kind of push back on it a little bit. Just kind of say, you know, I wouldn't worry about it. And fortunately, Bitcoin's history, including the block size wars and multiple hard forks, has underscored the community's commitment to preserving its core principles. And I think that's absolutely true. Adoption or stagnation, use this analogy of dogs eating the food. It is important that more and more dogs keep eating the Bitcoin food. And I think that as long as these fundamental characteristics of Bitcoin don't change, right? Like this idea of this 21 million hard cap, which will never change because it's mathematically encoded. And, you know, all these other fundamental aspects, you know, more people are going to eat the food because it just protects your purchasing power. It's just fundamentally important.
It's a better form of money if people will use it.
Magic internet money. That's what that was way back in the day. That was what this was called. People were, this is just magic internet money, right? Yeah. So there are some significant adoption metrics that you pointed out here in different things, right? That factors that have occurred in the past 5 years or so that are incredibly important. Nation state like El Salvador coming to play, you know, adopting Bitcoin as legal tender. They're not the first, they're not the last. But that's been incredible.
Corporations,
corporations, Bitcoin ETFs gaining SEC approval. Well, that was one hell of a fight with the previous administration. And they had to go to court and lose in court to be able to finally, you know, they've tried everything, right? You know, BlackRock, one of the huge asset managers, large institutional asset manager in the U.S., right? You know, we're talking 12 to, at this point, I think it's $12 trillion under management. I mean, that's a massive amount. You know, Bitcoin in the presidential race, right? You know, Trump and RFK Jr. were, you know, they were converted to becoming Bitcoiners, right? And, you know, some of them are further along in their journey than others. Obviously, RFK Jr. had an extra year or two to really understand and grasp the concepts. I've watched Donald Trump's sons on TV, like, you know, basically talk about how they got debanked because they were politically, they're part of the Trump family, right? So banks were essentially closing their accounts, and they said, holy shit, we get why this is important, right? The Canadian trucker stuff, all these other reasons. Now, Cynthia Lummis, who's absolutely fantastic. I love her. Such a great person. She has been hugely behind proposing, you know, the game theory of, hey, we need to have Bitcoin as part of a strategic reserve asset. And the Trump administration has really taken to that cause. They've announced that. MicroStrategy with Michael Saylor, network growth, the computing power behind Bitcoin, the mining growth. I mean, just just increasing, steadily marching higher, right? Which is just it's kind of saying, hey, you know, this network is incredibly important. We believe, you know, the miners are kind of saying, hey, we know this is going to continue to become more important. We are going to deploy capital machines, right? Because that's what we have to decide to do, right? Ahead of time, even. We're saying we're fundamentally bullish on this network and on this protocol.
Correct.
So I think, to your point, you know, the dogs have to keep eating the food. I think the dogs are
they are
just destroying the food.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, no, it's all working and arguably at an accelerated rate. I mean, we might be at that inflection point.
Tell me what this means. Not your keys, not your coins. Because the next chapter, the next section kind of talks about Bitcoin custody and key management, and you know, there's different trade-offs with all this.
Yeah, well, I think we've spoken about this a little bit before. I mean, as we all know, if you own a Bitcoin, what you own is a digital address that says there's one coin here, and to control that address, you have to have your private key, which BIP39 allowed you to convert, you know, a string of 256 characters into 12 or 24 words. And that private key is a nuclear code. And if you don't have that key, you can't move those coins. And if you do, you own those coins. If somebody gets your key, they can steal your coins. Excuse me. But the, to make it simpler, because that's a process that involves a little bit of knowledge and education to, have a cold storage wallet and a private key. The average boomer or the average, really anybody can buy Bitcoin through the brokerage account, their stock brokerage account, because there are ETFs, which, basically buy Bitcoin and hold it on behalf of the people who own those ETFs. Now, the risk there, of course, is that you do not have those coins. And if the government were to call up the ETF owners or the ETF managers and say, hey, just like Roosevelt did with gold, we want you to send all those Bitcoin to us and pay everybody out in dollars, they would have to comply with the law. And so as an investor in said ETF, you would not have those coins. So not your keys. I mean, in the case of those ETFs, the ETF does the key management for you, which is nice. But it means that in an extreme scenario where the government decided to start confiscating Bitcoin, they would be successful at confiscating yours if it were in an ETF. So I don't know how likely that extreme scenario is, but for those of us who worry about how aggressive governments can become, we like the fact that if the government was to say, to all of us, hey, have you got Bitcoin? Send it in.
That would go over real well.
Wouldn't go over very well, but we could all think, no, I'm not going to do that. Yeah. Or, I lost mine in a boating accident or, whatever. Good luck. Maybe I don't live in this country anymore, just because this is my wealth and you can't take it.
Yeah. I think that would be a massive exodus of Bitcoiners from the United. That would be a catastrophic decision if they did that.
I think so.
Here you're right. Bitcoin is a form of wealth that no army can overrun. I love that statement.
Isn't that amazing?
That's an amazing statement.
Yeah.
But the important thing to talk about with custody is that there's different forms of custody and they all have their own risks, right?
That's right.
So people say not your keys, not your coins, which is true, right, for self-custody. But there's also a risk to self-custody, right?
So you lose those words and you're screwed.
Exactly. So it's not like me personally, I spread my risk across many different things.
Exactly.
Right?
And that's the smart way to do it.
Right. Yeah. Of course I've got my not your keys, not your coins, right? My fuck you Bitcoin, right? Yeah. But also there's other risks. What if I get in an accident? What if something happens to me? There's all these different factors, right? So
right.
Yes, I've got the ETF. Yes, I've got MicroStrategy. Yeah, there's all these different ways.
And as we all know, they're coin management services. I mean, OnRamp does it and Unchained does it. Yep. I mean, if you don't feel comfortable doing self-custody on your own, you can get other people to help you. Yeah. But having said that, those firms as well, if they were approached by the government and the government said, give us those coins, they might do it.
Of course, right? So Bitcoin is it has these characteristics and factors, right? And people want exposure for different reasons, right?
Right.
I want exposure for all the reasons.
Right.
Jason Lowry, one of the beautiful features of Bitcoin, as pointed out by Jason Lowry, is that it's actually a form of property without physical form and therefore cannot be easily attacked. Have you read Soft War?
Oh yeah, it's a great book.
It got so interesting. Did you know that they actually banned the book? Like he wasn't allowed to. Did you know this?
Yeah, I know. He wrote it. This Jason Lowry is a major in the United States Air Force. He was at MIT as a graduate scholar, and he wrote a book. What's the name of it? Was it called Soft War?
Soft War, yeah.
Yeah. And the book basically looked at Bitcoin from a governmental strategic point of view, and that governments would want to own and control Bitcoin because it's the premier form of wealth in the world. And he kind of went through the history of wealth and war and so forth. And if you think back to it, I mean, a lot of wars have been fought really kind of over money, either money, land or property or gold or control of something. And so, and it was pretty straightforward. I mean, if you overran a country, you got all their land and you got all their gold and maybe you control their people. And here's a form of property that you can't touch. Can't overrun.
It's beautiful.
You can't swipe. Yeah. And so that's, it's different, right? It's and arguably, again, that's another reason why maybe wars would be less likely in a Bitcoin world, a Bitcoin-driven world.
Yeah. When I was looking for the book, I was like, why can't I find this book anywhere? I actually had to message Jason to be like, can I get a copy of the book?
The original. I mean, I think his thesis is publicly published, and I don't think they took that down, but I know some of the original copies were selling for like $3,000 because they stopped printing them.
Yeah, wow, that's wild.
And the government did that. The government was like, we really don't want this thing to spread wildly, this knowledge, probably to other countries. Although I'm sure they got it, but so please stop publishing it.
Why isn't that? That's wild.
It is wild.
Decentralization is reshaping the world, shifting power away from centralized governments toward individual liberty. Bitcoin is more than just an asset. It's a statement of freedom, sovereignty, and resilience in a centralized world. Fascinating.
Yeah.
Statement to close that section out. I love that. Policy responses. What is policy responses? Is this your my interpretation was like this was your take of like how you see this playing out.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Okay.
So a lot of people, and I start this chapter by saying, okay, Larry, so you're criticizing the Fed, you're criticizing the monetary system, you're saying it's all broken. All right, we're going to make you king or God or president or whatever. And what are you going to do to fix it, right? I mean, because nobody. I mean, remember the book is broken into two sections. The first part is the problem, which is kind of bad news. You read that and you can get angry and you think, God, this is really messed up and broken. Second part of the book is solution, which is Bitcoin and sound money. Within the solution portion, I wrote this chapter because I wanted to say, okay, if somebody gave me a lot of power and said, please fix this, this is what I would do. And I actually drafted the speech that I think an enlightened president could give to the country and say, look, guys, we've been doing the wrong thing. We've been operating on unsound money. We've been printing money to pay our debts. Keynes was wrong, and we need to return to sound money, and here's how we're going to do it. And then so I go through some steps that we would take to take us back to sound money. And, the thing I've said all along, I think it's really important because in fact, as recently as last night, I was accused on Twitter of being a doomer, about how bad all this stuff is. And I'm not a doomer. I'm a very optimistic person. The world is going in the right direction. Things are going to get better. Humans tend to figure out problems.
Yeah.
And we will, things will be much better in the future. We are going through a difficult transition in the monetary world right now. And so for that, maybe some people think I'm being a doomer because you can't deny that. It's just analysis that tells you that we are in that transition. But I will say that on the other side of that transition, things are going to be much, much better on a sound money standard. I mean like big time. And so the critical thing from my point of view is how do we get us all through that with the least amount of pain and with the fairest solution so that everybody comes out of it and goes, okay, that was hard. Think of it as like World War II. That really sucked. We had to fight this war. People died. All these losses. But gosh, we made it to the other side. We're on sound money now. Things are better, and we have a hopeful future. And the reason I say that to be true is, what are we going through? We're going through a monetary transition. Has this ever happened before? Oh, yeah. It's happened lots of times over history.
Yeah.
Plenty of countries have gone through this. Guess what? When they go through it and they come out the other side and they return to sound money, things get better really fast.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the good news. So my argument is, let's rip the Band-Aid off. Let's get through this bad period. Let's get to the other side, and let's have the things get better really fast part. As opposed to let's cling to the old system and drag out the pain for another 10, 15 years. It's like, to hell with the old system. Let's throw it out. So that's what the policy response chapter is about.
This gives me Thomas Sowell vibes. So you wrote this. This is
what is it?
You wrote, for too long, we've walked down a road paved with well-meaning intentions, but broken ideas.
Yeah.
Starting today, we will take bold action to restore fairness, accountability, and competition in our monetary system. Get me excited here. I read this. I'm like, who wrote this? Who wrote this? Let's go.
I wrote it.
I know. That's why I laughed at the end. Some will call this radical. They will warn of disaster. But I tell you, the true disaster would be to cling to a broken system that robs us of opportunity and binds us to debt. This is not a retreat from stability. It's a bold leap toward it. This is not abandoning the dream of prosperity. It's returning to the principles that make it possible. Tonight, we choose freedom. We choose responsibility. We choose a future where the fruits of your labor, your savings, and your enterprise are secure. A future where sound money sets the foundation for a stronger, fairer, and freer America. I love that. That's fantastic.
That's what I believe.
I vote for you, Larry.
I'm not running for president. I have no desire to do anything political. But if this idea catches on and some politician runs with it, I'll be his biggest fan or her biggest fan.
Oh, man. So this takes us kind of to this idea of a monetary reset, which we've talked about a little bit.
Yeah.
End the Fed. I mean, I think a lot of Bitcoiners would be very happy to see this. Dr. Ron Paul quotes, "The Federal Reserve should be abolished because it is immoral, unconstitutional, impractical, promotes bad economics, and undermines liberty. Its destructive nature makes it a tool of tyrannical government."
That's about says it all. Yeah. And if you had sound money, you wouldn't need a Federal Reserve.
Yeah, no doubt. The promoters of central economic planning rarely consider that the flawed policies of interventionism were actually the cause of the crisis and won't admit that more of the exact same thing will only dig the hole deeper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So true.
This reminds me of just like, the whole creation of the Fed to begin with, to like stop these like smaller boom and bust cycles. And then
they made bigger ones.
and then von Mises, the Austrian economists, are like, you do realize like you're going to create an epic bubble doing this.
And they
like,
did.
Just sure enough, like the Great Depression is like,
right.
Oh my goodness.
Yep.
Article 1, Section 10 of the Constitution. Ron Paul talks about this. We talked about it a little bit earlier, but no state shall make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debts. So there you have it, plain and simple. Paper money is unconstitutional, period.
Yeah, Ron Paul said that. Yeah, he's right.
The framers designed the Constitution to bind and restrict the power of the federal government, but courts and politicians have watered down these protections. This is what I love about Bitcoin and mathematical code is like there's no
You can't water it down.
There's no watering it down.
It just is.
You can't have a big government attack over the course of 20, 50, 100, 200
No.
Multiple centuries that slowly erode everything that this country was founded on. I mean, we've really like seen that. It's like it's gotten so insane.
Yeah, it really has.
The entire system of fiat money and fractional reserve banking is a super Ponzi-like scheme. If we can't pay it back, let's just create more. And it's the source of our problems. Why should we be surprised that if our government runs a Ponzi scheme, people feel morally justified in doing the same? Well, that was an interesting take.
Isn't that right?
Yeah. Max Kaiser amplified Dr. Paul's Ponzi sentiment, famously saying, "You can't taper a Ponzi." Max has been one of the most steadfast believers in the world changing potential of Bitcoin. Yeah, I love that I love his conviction. Just since day one,
from the beginning,
he's like he sees this and just all
Max is the high priest of Bitcoin.
Yeah,
he really is.
Yeah,
he's wacky, but he's a great guy.
Hey, real quick on that subject at the meetup, I brought up this point, and someone said, would that essentially rule out Bitcoin if we were to revert back to the Constitution? So if you could maybe
that is an interesting take.
Right,
yeah,
just throw that in there.
I think if the founders would be alive today and they would see Bitcoin, I think that in the Constitution they would have put Bitcoin should be the money.
Well, that's right. I mean, yes. I mean, I agree with you. So to answer your question, Paul, I think it's highly likely that as we transition back to this sound money, that they probably try gold first, just because there's more of it out there and people understand it. Mm-hmm. But then I think what occurs is it also becomes obvious that Bitcoin is a better form of gold.
Yeah.
And we go to that being the money. And I'm not even sure it needs to really be enshrined in the Constitution. Just like fiat really isn't enshrined in the Constitution. Yeah. We just operate on a fiat standard. I think that, without putting it in the Constitution, if fiat dies, which I believe it will, i.e. if I believe the dollar will die, the only question is when, then something has to replace it. And I think that, perhaps in a smaller way, some gold will replace it, but more realistically, in a bigger way, I think Bitcoin will just replace it naturally. And so we don't even need a constitutional amendment to go to a Bitcoin standard. We will just go there as the dollar, trickles away in terms of value, and nobody uses it anymore. And I think my kids and my grandkids will pay for things in Satoshis.
Let's talk a little bit about the election of Trump, because you kind of get a little bit into deep politics, and this is relevant to what's happening right now in the world. President Trump, pushing a pro-Bitcoin, quasi-libertarian, and populist platform, decisively won the Electoral College and popular vote. In the New York Times, David Brooks captured the shift in voter sentiment with an article aptly titled, "Voters to Elites, Do You See Me Now?"
Yeah. I mean, so for those who are less familiar with the American U.S. election in 2024, the Democrats were very anti-Bitcoin and had an anti-crypto army run by Elizabeth Warren. And Trump and RFK Jr., two candidates, and then, of course, RFK dropped out of the race and supported Trump, were both very much pro-Bitcoin and very much understood the liberty and the freedom and the separating of money from state issue. And, Trump won decisively, but, at the margin, certainly, I mean, I know he got all the Bitcoin vote.
I mean, that was a huge factor.
Right.
I mean, people don't understand, that there's a lot of, and I mean, not a huge amount, right? We're still at a low adoption rate, but that 2% of the population, 5% of the population,
at the margin,
that moves the needle.
Yeah, they obviously did the math, looked at the numbers. They also raised a lot of money.
Yeah.
from Bitcoiners and,
No doubt.
and crypto-oriented
No
people who said, look, these Democrats are trying to kill our businesses. We don't like that. We'll support you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's very interesting. I mean, this is something that, a couple of years ago, everyone thought, well, the government's going to ban it. Well, now it's actually playing a decisive role in a presidential election. It's like, wow.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. My analysis here is that, especially with Trump, the NFT community is what really, the idea of having this non-fungible token, where people bought Trump's NFT collection, and that NFT was like a membership. It gave you access to go meet him.
Yeah.
That was what actually got, our crypto entrepreneurs and Bitcoiners, and like even Bitcoiners
in the door,
got them into the door, right?
No, I mean,
to go see him and be at Mar-a-Lago and meet him. And he just had no clue what was really going on. And like, when you get FaceTime with somebody, you can spread the good word. You can
I think that's
teach them about it. You can make them understand why it's important. Tell them about choke point. Tell them what's going on, right? Like how your industry is being attacked. And Trump, if not anything else, he loves, innovation, America, and business.
Absolutely.
So if you made the argument, they're attacking our business.
Well, and I think what I think Vivek Ramaswamy, I think was one of his advisors. He's a Bitcoiner. And I think what Vivek says, hey, look, sir, if we don't do this, the Chinese are going to do it. And as you know, Trump is very anti-China.
He's competitive. He's a true American.
He's a true American. He's a competitive guy. It's like, hang on a second. We're not going to let that happen.
Yeah.
So I got to support this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. No doubt about it. So it was very interesting to see how that all played out. The Federal Reserve appears to be on a collision course with history. I love that statement. You also have in a side note this idea of the Overton window. Can you explain that? I can read you. Let me just read what you wrote here in the explanation. When an idea is within the Overton window, it is widely believed and acceptable. When not, it is considered fringe or not even given serious consideration.
Right. What was the fellow's name? John Overton, was it?
Joseph Overton.
Joseph Overton. Yeah. So this is a social scientist who coined that phrase, and you've described it very well. I mean, I think as we all know, there are things that just aren't discussed, or people think if you think that, you're nuts. And I mean, I think one of the more perfect ones of an example of the Overton window is the notion that the government assassinated Kennedy. I think 20, 30, 40 years ago, most of America would have thought that's absolutely impossible. There's no way our government ever would have done that. And yet, I think given all the evidence that's come out, and given the time, and given the understanding of a lot of people, I talked to young people today. I talked to many people today. I think there's a very high percentage of the country that now understands that that's probably what occurred. I know I personally think it occurred. So.
I would say it's definitely within the Overton window now, for sure.
Yes, right. And there was a time when if you thought that, you were a nut.
Yeah.
A complete nut.
Yeah.
And now it's like, well, no, hang on a second. This doesn't all hold together. Maybe you're not a nut. So, so the Overton window shifts. And I think that, the Overton window used to be, the U.S. federal government is the best government in the world, and the dollar is as good as gold, and they would never debase our money, and that's all getting thrown in the trash can.
You have a great. This is where you show the pictures of Ben Bernanke and where the Atlantic.
Oh,
the biggest propaganda outlet of them all have a picture of him, and they have the title "The Hero."
Yeah. Yeah, it's. We've been gaslit so badly. I mean, the Federal Reserve. I mean, they've been the cause of a lot of these problems, and yet they've tried to portray themselves. I mean, this is the opening scene where I went at Harvard Business School. They were taking a victory lap about how they saved the world in 2008.
Yeah.
And what I would suggest is that no, their policies are what blew up the world in 2008.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I think once you get into this dangerous game where you're just constantly making the bubble bigger and bigger and bigger, it's like it's almost like you're on this, like you said, you're on the collision course with history, and you almost have to keep the Ponzi going, or else it's kind of where you're at.
So. No, it's inflate or die.
So
as Richard Russell says.
So basically, like in that sense, is like he.
Oh, what they're doing is logical.
Yeah,
I mean, I totally explain. It explains why they do it. They've got to do it to kind of perpetuate their system. But what's unsaid is that their system is just deeply flawed.
This is a really cool aside here. A little historical tidbit you add in here about this guy named John Law. So most people don't know the history of John Law. But if you're a Bitcoiner, at some point you may have gone down that rabbit hole to kind of understand what's that history of that fiat money. I don't think you have it here, but I think it was called the assignat. if I'm correct.
No, that was the second one. The first one was the Mississippi bubble.
Okay.
I'm
getting all my
France had two examples of hyperinflation. One was in the early 1700s, which was the Mississippi bubble with law. The second was the assignat, which came about as a result of helping us fight the revolution. And they spent too much money, and that led to the French Revolution and then the assignat.
Oh, man. I'm getting my history mixed up.
That's all right.
All these hyperinflators.
It's hard to keep track of all the hyperinflations. There've been a number of them.
It's hard to keep track of. I can't remember what you called them, the serial hyperinflators or whatever.
Yeah.
So in 1716, law took control of the French monetary system by establishing the Banque Royale, flooding the economy with paper money and speculative shares tied to the Mississippi Company, which he controlled. Prices soared, with Law's money printing operation driving shares of the Mississippi Company from 500 to 10,000 livres, but the bubble inevitably burst. The collapse wiped out fortunes, and this is classic. And Law fled in disgrace, caught trying to smuggle gold, the very asset he derided as obsolete, hidden in his carriage. He died in poverty, a pariah.
Yeah,
that's just like so poetic.
Isn't it great? Yeah. I often say Ben Bernanke could end up being the John Law of our age.
Unfortunately, now they can hide Bitcoin and use Bitcoin like everybody else.
Well, that's true. Maybe he's buying Bitcoin. The rumor is he's been buying gold, but
really. What also a little historical tidbit that I found interesting was that the term millionaire was first coined during this bubble because it was the first instance of people actually having so many
million of something,
million of some currency unit. Isn't that wild?
Livre,
yeah, that is a fascinating little bit. But history is a fascinating story if you go back and look at all these things and really
what we're living through has happened before.
Fascinating. I think this is a good stopping point, and then we'll come back to do our very final episode of our series.
Fantastic.